And everybody, this is Peter Meszaros, and he is in the freezing temperatures of Hamilton, Ontario. Correct me if I'm wrong, Peter. And I met Peter at Oshkosh. He flew the Air Venture Cup race twice, I think. Venture Cup race up to Oshkosh a couple of years, and he's got a unique story to tell. And so, given all that, I'm just going to hand it over to him. Thanks for doing this, Peter.
You're welcome. I don't know if you can see me. I hope you can.
Go ahead and raise the camera up a little bit more, even with your eyes there. There, good.
Okay. I welcome you to my humble rickety hangar in Brantford, Brantford, Ontario, which is a few miles to the west of Hamilton, where I live. And my old Q-2 lady also welcomes you, and she's looking pretty good. What I would like to do, rather than to talk about myself and the history, we can leave that to an end. I'd like to go around the airplane a couple of times. The first time, so you have an idea of what the almost entirely original Q-2 looks like. And then we'll look at some of the details, which I think are worthwhile pointing out, specifically because I had for some time, for a period of perhaps 1 year, monitored the Quickie website, and I saw various conflicting points being made, pros and cons and all that. And I will probably subject you to my own personal opinions on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to do this slowly enough that you will not get motion sickness. Okay, do you have everything? Can you see this, Sam?
Terrific.
Okay, so this is an old Q2. What I will mention later on, probably the first one, because I actually have the very first fuselage shell that came out of the mold that was on tour for promotion purposes by Gary Laguerre. So I'm going to start off, since I'm here at the back, first of all, at the tail. And one quick little advice for those of you that have airplanes stored in communal hangars where other people tend to move your airplane around. A little dolly like this and the tail wheel is essential because the tail wheel, as you know, doesn't swivel, and people are really awkward at moving the airplane about if they have to push it around. So we'll move up from here. I always like the rear view of the airplane more than the front. I guess I have the same impression about women, but nevertheless, here it is. One of the features of the airplane, of course, for transportation purposes, is the two-piece fuselage. If anybody is still building them or haven't finished building, highly, highly, highly recommend the two-piece fuselage.
I couldn't imagine not having a split.
No, I can't imagine. But there is one thing I would like to recommend, is that at least annually, if you don't take it apart, or twice a year, you go with a screwdriver and loosen those screws, because once they corrode and you cannot turn them, you will be a very sad person. I had one time this happened to me, and I had to go with a hacksaw through the opening and cut the tang off and then make a new one just to be able to take the airplane apart.
Oh, bad news.
Interesting part about the Quickie, which surprised most people in the beginning, is that it's got ailerons at the root. Wonderful, wonderful idea. It makes the entire aileron installation and the whole control system of the airplane so simple. And by the way, it's highly effective. As you know, the span-wise lift distribution on the wing, it's more effective towards the root than the tip. And because this airplane has such a short wingspan, it really doesn't need a great deal of additional moment in order for it to work. Very nice idea that was initially thought of by, I guess, in the first Quickie. And Our canopy is the good old-fashioned, simple clamshell canopy. I feel sorry for those guys that spend hundreds of hours designing flip up, slide forward, slide back, rotate various kinds of canopies, because there's nothing as simple and as nice and easily sealing as one of these clamshells, and you'll see that later. Here we go around standard fuel door. Oh, you see that little aluminum scoop on the side of the airplane? Well, the first 2 times I went flying the airplane was the heat of the summer, and I just didn't get good enough cooling because that was not really a very good NACA scoop that I made. I just sort of mimicked one. So I had to make a temporary little aluminum scoop, and I siliconed it on the side of the airplane, and it's been there for 39 years, and it's still stuck. In fact, I can grab a hold of that and move the airplane around, and it still doesn't come off. Here we are on the wing. One of the things you'll notice that I have the very first GU airfoil, and I flew it that way for 35 years before I put on the vortex generators. And by the way, it's a good idea. The Sparrow strainer there, I'm going to talk about that later, maybe the second time around. Standard wheels on the wingtips, the nicest, smartest, and the most unique feature of the airplane. It gives the airplane sufficient shock absorbing as the wing flexes, and it is ideal. I don't know where people got the idea that it is more difficult to fly the airplane with the wheels on the wingtips than further inbound. And we see all sorts of Frankenstein versions of the airplane with the wheels put somewhere halfway within the wing, etc. Really not worth the effort. This was the very first tail wheel airplane I have ever flown. Never flew another one before this one. And I tell you, this is just as easy to fly or easier than many others. As far as the wheel pant is concerned, almost right in the very beginning, I didn't like the fact that it was so square in the front. And I immediately, even building the airplane in the beginning, I rounded it off nicely and make it a little bit more streamlined. And it is one of those features, unfortunately, that the airplane, since this was very early in the kit building times of aircraft, it was a really minimal crude kit. In fact, they went too quickly from the proof of concept into commercialization and production, so it was not at all refined. Other than that, we can talk about the wing and my experience with it later. As you notice from this angle, slightly different brakes. We're going to talk about that as well. But first, the wheel pad, it was much further down in the beginning, nicely contoured, looked really sexy and streamlined, except there's a problem. You have a flat tire, and you will have flat tires. If not so far, you will have it later. And you better make sure that when you have a flat tire, the airplane doesn't bottom out, because it may be that much more difficult to move it off the runway. What is a little different from the original, let me see if I can get a better lighting on it without backlighting, is that it's a slightly different cowl, as you see on the airplane. I changed that only after about 1 or 2 years, because I wanted to improve the cooling of the airplane. And you can see that the cowl dips below the wing, and now the cowl flap is open. That allows the air to flow better out underneath the fuselage without the firewall, as it was in the original, producing a back pressure and not allowing a sufficient pressure differential between the top and the bottom of the cowl. Then we come around. And this side is not much different, as you see. And I will talk about some of the the changes later on. The airplane has got lights on it, but why anybody would want to fly this airplane at night? Or it's a nice sport airplane, and people should keep it at that. And yes, I had big hopes for it, for doing all sorts of things. I was going to fly it long distances, cross country, IFR, and all that. But really, it's a beautiful sport airplane with 2 seats, just right for 1 person. Okay.
Yeah.
So we got once around. So now for a few details. About we talked about the tail wheel not being swiveling. When I look at this setup with the rudder cables going directly to the tail wheel, what a terrific idea. It allows great control on the ground, all sorts of things. And then, of course, up to the rudder. Sam already pointed out one danger in this, and that is that if for some reason you lose your tail spring, you will lose the rudder control. And for that reason, he devised a system in which he had another second set of cables going from within the fuselage to the rudder. Good idea. I don't have it on mine, but that's a good idea. Notice I have the original little 4-inch tail wheel. There's no need for a bigger tail wheel. That works perfectly fine. And it really sings when you're running around at 80, 90 miles an hour on the runway, but nevertheless, it's good. If you notice, I have some repair on the tail spring. I've never broken the tail spring, but what has happened that the bolt that goes through it, because of the torque during deflection, split that particular tail spring, even though it was wrapped, but it didn't fail on me. So what I did was I assembled it and I wrapped it with the bid right over the steel tubing that slides over the tail spring, and everything is perfectly fine. It has been that way for a dozen years or so. Okay, let's go somewhere else. An air outlet, which happens to be under the wing, I believe it's a reasonable outlet for the cabin cooling. I had one on the bottom that was larger, and I thought it was a good place to have it. It turned out it was a very bad place to have it. I actually had reverse flow of exhaust, so I had to plug that up at that particular time. Coming around again, you noticed the Sparrow strainer. And you were wondering when and how and why I put the Sparrow strainer on that. Well, this was one of the first airplanes flying, and it was very interesting how the airplane performed because of the loads on the elevator. For those of you that have flown it without will realize that when the airspeed increased, the elevator tended to go upward, which made the airplane go nose down, which made it even go faster. So it seemed unstable. Something was needed to keep the elevator from deflecting upward on its own. So a Sparrow strainer. But why do I have it here? Why don't I have it at the root where most people put it? Well, I've had it there. And if we take a look at some of the paint that is missing from the bottom of my elevator, we would realize I had Sparrow strainers inboard, outboard, on both sides, and on one side. And this is the only one that I need for this airplane. The reason I didn't put it inboard is because it had a different effect when the airplane was under power in a climb. It decided to deflect the elevator even more downwards, in which case I had to retrim it. And when I pulled the power back off, it readjusted itself. So the Sparrow strainer being in the slipstream of the propeller was not a good idea. Out towards the tip was not a good idea because it wasn't nearly as effective. So I moved it just far enough out to be out of the slipstream of the propeller, plus a little bit more because people tend to walk around the airplane and look inside the cockpit, and they keep on breaking it off. But at this particular time, you see the size of my Sparrow strainer. It has a strange curvature in the trailing edge. That's got nothing to do with aerodynamics. It was because it was too big. So I kept on carving it down, 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 down until finally I've got the amount of area I need. I've got a nice moment arm on it, and it works perfectly fine. The Sparrow strainers and the GU canard were a good addition. I flew for 35 years without them, and of course, had all the problems with rain and bugs and all that, but at least it forced me to keep the wing clean. Having added these Sparrow strainers made a huge difference to the behavior. It is much friendlier. I don't have a pulsing elevator, which I used to get when the laminar bubble wanted to separate occasionally. And it's reduced my landing speeds considerably because the airplane just floats and floats and has nice control on landing. It was a very good addition. One of the interesting things I did when I did the Sparrow strainers, you don't get very good description as to how to mount them. But if I take a look at the actual angle, the neutral angle on them, they are a little bit, the angle at the root is different from the angle a little bit towards the tip because we have a little bit of inflow at the tip and a little bit of outflow at the roots. And there's a difference of about 3 to 5 degrees in their sort of neutral axes. Now the brakes.
Peter, you call them the Sparrow strainers. You mean the vortex generators?
Oh, of course I meant the vortex generators. Was
minor correction. Yeah.
My mistake. That's the Sparrow strainer. I'm
right.
Sorry. And those are the vortex generators. Sorry. My mistake. Oh, I'm a little bit nervous here.
Oh, you're doing great.
Take a look at the brakes. These are the original Hurst Earhart brakes, which work perfectly fine. Historically, mine had cable-operated drum brakes, which threw out before I ever finished the airplane. We got to the Hurst Earhart brakes that was suggested, excellent. And if you notice, if you look carefully at the wheel pant, you notice there's still the recess and ident of the original mounting aluminum brackets that were used. Terrible. What I did here was, if you take a look, is I have 2 rods or tubes going through such that the brakes are prevented from rotating. They're supported by this particular bracket, an identical one like this, on the far side inside. So that caliper floats back and forth nicely on those 2 rods, and there's no tendency for it to torque, and it gives me wonderful smooth braking power. Okay.
That brake style, it's been through a couple of iterations, and this method is the one that I think works great. There was another builder named, I think his first name is Mike Coughlin, and he published some drawings on that. I put them on mine, and we have them on the Q list if anybody wants to find them in the file section, but great mod.
Yeah, I have some sketches too, hand sketches, if anybody is interested in it, and how to put that. You can actually retrofit your wheel pan to take this, and it'll work. And of course, independent toe brakes, hydraulic toe brakes are very important. I haven't had to touch them or do anything to them since I built the airplane in 81, 82. Okay, so I haven't had any broken lines or leaks or anything of that nature whatsoever. All right, so let me go around. I'm going to hand the camera over to my friend Ron, and I'm going to open the canopy and climb inside. as I said before, nothing beats a nice ordinary clamshell canopy. And you know, the only thing is,
Just a moment. Ron, can you
Yeah.
bring the camera in a little closer? Because we're having a hard time hearing him.
oh,
There
I
you
will
go.
speak louder then.
There you go.
Yeah. And it's just a straight ordinary canopy. But notice there are two hinges, one on each end. That's close enough. One on each end to make sure that it is properly supported. And I have no need to have any other kind of hinging. And notice the canopy opens wide enough for any two people to crawl inside and to comfortably become seated. And the only recent addition, probably in the last 10 years, was that air shock holio at the back, which seems to do a very good job of holding it open and keeping the canopy restrained. Okay, so when I back off on, I'll climb inside. Getting in and out of the airplane is no big deal. Just sit on the edge. And in you go, like that. And you're all nice and comfy. Now, just hand me the camera for a minute. Now for my instrument panel on this particular airplane. It's still my original panel, and notice there are all sorts of holes in it because I've taken instruments out and put instruments in. And the first thing is, in the center, I used to have an ILS, not because I wanted to fly the airplane, instrument condition. It was just for practice reasons. It's gone, it's in my Cessna. Over there, I had all the original mechanical instruments, no electrical senders. And now I have a big hole where the oil pressure gauge supposed to be, because I just got my engine back and the fitting for my engine doesn't suit the original oil sender. So that is something I will have to modify because it's sort of, this is in flux. And I got all those breakers and I had all sorts of switches. Notice most of them are gone because they're not needed. Just standard basic instrumentation. Nothing more is needed. Oh, there, the T-handle, wonderful. Will you take the camera, please? This T-handle here, of course, is the all essential, most important Sparrow strainer. When I first flew the airplane, probably about the third or fourth test flight, I thought, oh, might as well give the airplane a little wash by taking it to a shower. And I flew into a rain shower with, again, the original GU Canard, and the airplane very enthusiastically headed for the ground. It took most of my strength on the elevator to keep it a level flight until I flew out of the shower. Then it pitched nose up and it was very happy to fly. At that time, the question was, what do we do here? And I called Quickie Aircraft and they said, oh, we were gonna tell you about that, but we didn't know you were already flying. I said, well, I've been at it for a while, should be fine. So anyways, I developed this eccentric cam kind of reflexor with a T-handle, and it works absolutely wonderfully. Down here, where we have the normal trim wheel. Well, I actually haven't changed that trim. Probably maybe once a year I look at it, because once it's set in an appropriate position, I kind of lock it. After that, all my trimming for the airplane I do with If you notice my wonderful control stick, that beautiful handle with all the buttons on it, well, I don't do that. I have one button on it for the radio and that's it. And as you notice, it's just worn on the two sides because I can fly the airplane with just the two fingers. That's how it flies. And right from the start, I put in the two different push rods for each elevator to work independently. So I could, if needed, to trim the airplane for lateral stability by adjusting each of the ailerons independently. I put that in right in the very beginning. And that was not much of a mod, but it had to be done. What was I going to say about it? Oh, yes. And the reflexor, I have flown in very heavy rain before, and the reflexor needs to go up a reasonable amount. For instance, can you swing around to the back, Ron, to see how much it's up? Notice that's my maximum up, that's my maximum down, and pretty well that much play was necessary before I had the vortex generator installed.
So you're routing on that from the T handle, you've got a cable that goes back to the eccentric on the reflexor itself in the tail cone, right?
That's right. A cable goes directly from there. And that's all that I use to trim the airplane, nothing else. I never touched the trim wheel from that time on, okay? And notice my important instrumentation here. The only thing I have is a recent edition of the Dynon D3, which most of you know what it's about. And right here is probably the first generation of the Garmin Pilot 3. And I still only use this when I fly cross country, even in the races all the way to the Dakotas and back. And why do I use this over some of the other fancier things? It's because it's a black and white liquid crystal display, and I can read it in the brilliant sunlight, and I never have to worry and shield the screen because it's always visible. I do also carry an iPad with ForeFlight on it as backup, but that's it.
Peter, what do you have for your brake actuation?
Sorry, what do I have for what?
For your brakes, what handles are?
Two toe brakes, independent toe brakes, like on the Cessna.
Okay.
I don't have a hand brake or anything like that. I just have the normal toe brakes, and I swing the airplane around with it. I usually can lock one wheel and then swing the airplane around with it. The tail wheel skids around, bounces around, and every few years I have to buy a new one because the rubber wears off, but that's about all. Okay, as far as the inside goes, it's a nice, comfortable, and just because it has two seats, it doesn't mean that it's a two big person airplane. When I fly it alone with my 138 to 140 pounds and fuel on board, it's like a fancy high performance fighter. It'll do anything. I can do some reasonable aerobatics with it. Don't you dare try a loop, because you'll need 6,000 feet to do a loop, but don't do that. But otherwise, it is a wonderful airplane, flies beautifully, handles beautifully. You put a second person in it at 1,000 pound gross weight, it probably flies like a Mack truck, okay? At least with my Revmaster engine in it. So I'm gonna get it. And it's no big deal to get in and out. As I say, don't spend hundreds of hours building and designing fancy cannons. All right. I loosened the cowl, so I will take off the cowl, the top, first of all, and then my friend Matthew will help me take off the bottom cowl.
What kind of fasteners do you use for your cowling?
Sorry?
What kind of fasteners do you use for your cowling? Screws or Zeus screws?
Flat, ordinary little stainless steel flat-headed screws.
All right.
The point here is to have a look at what I had to do in order to keep it better cooled. I made a fiberglass plenum. It looks pretty rough because it was a more or less a test on how I was going to cool the engine. Again, built like 37 years ago. And it was just a prototype, but like anything else, it ended up staying there permanently. So I never bothered to tidy it up and look at it differently. Have the camera for a second. Okay. This is the Revmaster engine, of course, and I've had pretty good success with the Revmaster engine. I had a crankshaft failure only because my friend under full power had a propeller strike with it. And for that reason, 150 hours later, I had a broken crankshaft. That's a long story, very interesting, how I managed that with my new Pilot 3. And the difference I have, notice I have a fiberglass platen for the oil cooler. Put it on this side. For the oil cooler, that allows the oil cooler to take a separate air. So it goes against the bottom of the oil sump and through the oil cooler and out the bottom of the airplane. Right now, the carburetor is being temporarily, this is the old Revmaster carburetor. I have two different carburetor setups, but just for test flying purposes, I have this one installed at the moment, and it's not really all that permanent. There you see my heat muff for the carburetor heat, which we need, which we not only are regulated to have on our engine installations in Canada, is a must as far as I'm concerned. So this plenum works out very well. The inlets are only about 3 inches in diameter, but it could be a little bit bigger, but it is very well sealed, and it provides the cooling that I need. The engine.
I'm a big believer in plenums for cooling. Now, do you have a duct that runs to the front of the your cowling from that?
Yes, I just removed it, and here is one. It looks like this. Sorry. Oh, that's the other side. Sorry about the shaking. Yeah, okay. It looks like this.
All right.
Duct, and of course, you need to have a flexible coupling because the cowl is rigidly attached to the airplane and the engine moves, so you have to have some kind of a flexible coupling there.
Nice and simple. I like it.
Yeah, and so that's it so far. So if there are, is there any other thing that you think I should point out on the airplane before we get to some questions?
Ooh, anybody? I'm not seeing anything on the chat screen. All right. Now I think I got it right. Okay. Take it away.
All right. Well, I don't know what you want to hear, but the story behind this airplane goes like this. When I first saw the Q-1, I was very interested in the airplane, and there was the airplane was being promoted by a gentleman here in Canada. His name was Fred Stubbs, and he was building one, so I went to visit him, and I kind of liked the whole concept of the airplane. And I just told him, yeah, I would build one right away if it had 2 seats. At that time, I thought that was very important to me. And a little while later, he called me and said, hey, don't tell anyone, but there's a 2-seat version on the make. I said, well, let me know as soon as it becomes available. I have to have a look at it. I found that Gary Laguerre, a Canadian fella, built a 2-seat version, copying the Wiki 1 concept. Sorry, what is it? Too much noise?
Yeah.
Oh, so All right. So anyways, when Gary Laguerre built the first prototype, and I had looked like
I'm sorry.
I said I want one just like that. If it becomes available, put me on the list right away. So he said, okay, fine. And then Gary Laguerre hooked up and they built this quickie aircraft group. Some of you know the history better than I do in the beginning, who formed what and when. But they redesigned the airplane without my knowing, actually. And they changed the shape of the fuselage. And I was very disappointed when I saw the first shell that came out of the mold, because I was going to have that shell, which was being taken on a promotional tour throughout North America, because I kind of liked the original squarer looking shell better at the time. Nevertheless, that's what I got. And I got probably the first kit, maybe not the first kit, but it was serial number 2001, because I was told that all foreign registrations will be 2000 and higher, and 1000 series will be, or less, will be left to the United States market. They had such big plans for the airplane. So I got my kit, 2 bales of foam, 10 jugs of epoxy, 2 rolls of fiberglass, and a bunch of hand sketches, and that was it. Go to it. Well, I went to it, and contrary to what some of other people's experiences are, I built the entire airplane from scratch, from front to beginning, in an 8-month period of spare time. It took, the calendar, the time was just over a year, because I would only had a cold barn in which to assemble the airplane. And you can imagine what the weather's like here. You don't do work in a cold barn with building a composite airplane. So, but about a 4 to 5 month intermission period, I finished the airplane in about 8 months worth of working time, and just the way it is right now, with almost no changes whatsoever to it. Still has the original paint job. I still have the original engine from Revmaster. Whenever I go and ask them for parts, or ask them for, they ask for the serial number, and they say, "What? You still have that engine?" Yeah, I still have that engine. It's it's served me reasonably well, not without problems, but it has served me well. Just recently, I had it overhauled by them, even though I've done some overhauls myself, and to the recommendation of Dave or Doug out in Orange.
Dave Dugas.
Dave Dugas, that's right. Sorry, thank you very much. Sorry, Dave, if I forgot. He said, "Oh, he has an aluminum crank. An aluminum case." So I asked Joe Horvath, "Give me an aluminum case," because I know that's indestructible. You can always replace parts, but the case is a problem. So I asked for an aluminum case. It came back. I just did the test flying. It's a little heavier than the original magnesium case. Nevertheless, it seems to be working so far. I've only had 2 flights in the airplane since I put the engine back in, and now it's getting to be cold winter time. I don't know how soon I will fly it, because I'm still working with the carburetor. So the only modifications I did on the airplane were right in the very beginning. I rounded the wheel pans out nicely. I added the 2 push rods for the elevators instead of having them being joined together. I put in the hydraulic brakes, independent toe brakes. I put in there, and when I installed the fuel tanks, I made sure that I would install them in such a way that they will never leak, and they haven't leaked. Okay, so that was very good. And the only other modifications I added to the airplane after it was flying, a slightly different shaped cowl, so air doesn't go in through the vent in the bottom under high angle of attack. So the cowl was different. I added the vortex generators and the aileron reflexor. So beside that, the airplane is really stock.
Peter, we got a couple of questions here. They want to know about your performance numbers and how much time do you have on it, and what kind of speeds and what kind of fuel burn?
Well, unfortunately, I suffer from the same infliction that many of your viewers, that we're just too involved in flying and we sacrifice everything towards it. I have a little bit too many airplanes and too many projects to be flying the Quickie entirely on. It's not the only airplane I fly. I've got a Cessna, and I do a lot of gliding in the Alps in the summertime, which is kind of nice. So, and I did a lot of hang gliding before. So my airplane has on it about 600 hours time, but it does fly every year. And my performance is, I get about 155 miles an hour normally in cruise out of the airplane. I like to fly it with the Revmaster engine. I like to fly the Revmaster at 3,200 RPM. And I usually fly about at 130 knots or something like that. That's sort of my normal flying numbers.
What did your speeds turn out in the Air Venture Cup race to Oshkosh?
They 156 miles an hour, but of course, they do include, it's city to city flying, right? So it's air navigation, turning points, takeoff, landing, that kind of thing. I did on the race from in the Dakota. What's the airport called in Dakota? Yes, from Mitchell. That was nice because the air was smooth and the terrain was smooth and it wasn't very high density altitude. I remember it on one leg to the middle turning point with a very slight downhill of maybe about a 3-degree downhill, accelerated to the turning point. I was pushing it at about 200 indicated, but I don't recommend that in case you fly into turbulence or anything like that. And of course, at that speed, my tachometer didn't. I don't know what it read because it only over 4,000 RPM.
Yeah, great.
I recommend that, but I don't think the airplane was designed. I don't believe the airplane was designed for such speed. So I think one is taking a risk without really knowing those structural numbers that are real.
Yeah, it would be better if somebody else found those numbers out.
Yes, well, I do, as part of my madness, I do airplane design and prototyping, either for myself or on commission since that time, but I have never done an analysis on my own airplane. As far as takeoff and landing performance, I can clearly say that whatever field I can land in, I can get out of. In other words, the takeoff performance is easier to manage than the landing performance. Mm-hmm. And it's so clean that it comes in a very shallow angle of attack. Yep. And individuals that are have experience in flying, they know that the steeper your approach angle, the safer landings and the more precise landings you can make. Whereas this airplane comes in quite flat. If you're 50 feet higher over on the threshold than you should be, it'll take you another 1,000 feet of runway. Mm-hmm. So you should know how to manage the approach. I normally turn final at 100 miles per hour indicated on my airspeed indicator, which I'm not too sure what it is in real life. And I try to come over the threshold at about 80 to 90 indicated. And then it still gives me lots of time to float and make a nice, easy landing and just let it roll. But the brakes are essential. If you don't have brakes above anything else, you gotta put good brakes on the airplane because even at idle, it'll go off the far end of a 3,000 foot runway, still doing 80 miles an hour if you don't have brakes.
Yes, and comment about the brakes. You know, some people think that maybe the go-kart brakes are not the greatest, but I think there's plenty of braking there. And if you were to put those brakes on full on, you would flip over. Would you agree with that?
I agree with you, except for the one thing. I don't think you ever flip over. You can definitely brake so hard that the tail wheel will come up, but you've got that big wing behind you, and when you're still moving forward, it doesn't allow you to go over the top. And the worst you can do is at that time you apply power, something like that, you may touch your prop, but I've never had such an experience.
I have.
Oh, have you?
I have. This is speaking from experience. Early on in my flight regime, I put the brakes, went off a runway and pulled the brakes on full, and over I went. So they're very effective.
Whoa, my goodness. But did you still have a lot of airspeed?
No.
I can understand that once your airspeed has diminished so that the rear wing will not be forced down.
Right.
Maybe there is nothing wrong with the Hurst Earhart brakes. It gives you plenty of braking power. And that's why I've retained them. You know, I did whatever I needed to work them properly. And as I said, I have on the tubes that go through, I have my brake calipers are supported on both sides in such a way that the disc is right in the middle between those two supports. So there's no tendency for it to swing either one way or the other. It just slides back and forth. I did actually, at one time, trying to solve the braking situation, are we okay? I made a floating disc instead of the floating caliper, and I backed away from it. That was not a good move. I know some people may have tried it and think it's good. I found it a poor solution compared to just making the calipers float back and forth the way they're supposed to. And the support on both sides, balancing it out was the perfect solution that I found. Yeah, so. Are there
what about do you have any memorable flying experiences besides Oshkosh and the AirVenture Cup that you'd like to share?
Well, I have one memorable experience that I should be ashamed of sharing, but I will anyways. And that was still in the first year or so of my flying, where we went for a photo shoot. And the photo airplane was a Cessna 150. So first of all, the speed differences were different, but that was okay. But we were supposed to meet over a certain fix. I wasn't too sure where that fix was. I couldn't find the photo plate. So in behind me, if you noticed in the canopy, I can reach back and get things from behind my head. The chart was somewhere in the back. Wasn't sure, I couldn't reach it. So I undid my seatbelt. I sort of trimmed the airplane for a nice flight. I undid my seat back and I turned around like this to search in the compartment. And at that time, with my left knee, I kneeled on the stick forward. As the airplane pitched violently forward into a vertical. I was stuck backwards in the canopy. Then I got myself around quickly, pulled the power off, and then waited. As the engine was screaming away, halted gently, I pulled it out. I was expecting it to flutter, but I believe I flutter tested the airplane to about 260 miles per hour.
Oh, man.
But it came out of the almost exact vertical dive with power on, and I survived it.
That's a good story.
You know, I've lived now long enough and I've grown up enough that I don't feel so ashamed of saying things like that.
Well, I got a few things I still don't talk about, but
yeah. So the other experience was, of course, on my way when I went to Oshkosh one year. I flew, went directly from here, direct west, and I decided to fly over Lake Michigan. And of course, as you fly over Lake Michigan, you get what they call Lake Watch, where they say every so many minutes you're supposed to report high and dry, high and dry. So first time I reported, yeah, everything's fine. What did I say? Are you high and dry? Yes, I'm high and dry. Okay, very good. I got into Fond du Lac at that time, no problem. Oshkosh was a beautiful holiday. On the way home, I decided I'm not going to go over the lake. I'm going to go around south of Chicago backwards. And halfway home, around Howell, Michigan, I broke the crankshaft. I could have broken the crankshaft while I was going over Lake Michigan, but my crankshaft broke then, as I said, about 150 hours after the prop strike. But by this time, I was at 5,500 feet with my flight plan filed across the border into Hamilton, Ontario, and I was above a cloud deck, a broken cloud deck. Was not a problem. What am I going to do? I had the little pilot tree you have there, you saw there. I had that on the seat beside me because I just purchased it. And the only thing I've done to it was I turned it on and off just to make sure that it was functioning, that the battery power was on. Well, I had this there. I took it out of the box from beside me and I turned it on to see what would happen. Of course, it came up with the map of North America, US, Canada, everything. But I noticed it had a zoom button. So I zoomed in, zoomed in, zoomed in, zoomed in, zoomed in, zoomed in. And there was a little icon of my airplane with a crumb trail behind it. And just a black icon, crumb trail behind it. And then I noticed that about 8 o'clock from me, there was a paved airport. So here I'm turning the plane around, everything is shaking and out of the instrument panel, and this little pilot tree telling me, okay, I'm heading towards the airport now. And then I've descended down through the cloud, and there it was. Howell, Michigan, the airport was right in front of me. I was lined up with the runway. I landed on the runway, and the engine stopped on the runway at that time and pulled it off. And I have that little pilot tree to thank for my safe landing at the airport. So that's a bit of an exciting trip.
Yes, so the crankshaft broke, but it kept on running somewhat, huh?
It's like this. When a crankshaft breaks or any thing breaks because of torsion, those of you that are sort of engineers know that the stress is mostly on the 45-degree. So what happened is that the brake was at a 45-degree angle, right exactly where the camshaft gear is being driven by a key. So it was right in the keyway. And there was a retaining bolt like this. And that retaining bolt is about that big in diameter and about 1/4 of an inch thick, that's all. But because it broke at an angle, half the nut was over the crankshaft in the engine, and the other half of the nut was over the forward portion of the crankshaft, which was essentially nothing more than about that much shaft, the flange, and the propeller. So that's what kept the propeller from separating. But as it turns, it can continue to turn because the 45-degree locks them in position. So you have this enormous rattle that's going on as the two parts separated from each other. The more they separated, the bigger the rattle. So I have a photo of this nut that looks like this, like that. The bottom portion holding on, and then the flange portion. It deflected about 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch And that's how the two shafts came apart and they rattled against each other as I made the landing. Not a nice experience.
No.
So my advice is, you have a prop strike, tear the engine down, take out the crankshaft, and have it properly magnafluxed.
Yep.
It originally didn't show any damage, but I have it magnafluxed, and that's what happened.
Mm-hmm.
So that was interesting. I have flown the airplane back and forth in commuting from between Hamilton and Montreal and Ottawa and Quebec City, mostly in the Canadian side. I have been to Oshkosh with the airplane, and I have been to Mitchell. Mitchell was a good flight, very good flight. The only other interesting thing about the Mitchell flight was that we transferred from the main tank to the header tank, and I usually run on the header tank, and I only turn the fuel pump on whenever I need to when the fuel tank goes down. But it was a nice long flight. I was getting bored, whatever it was. I wasn't paying attention. So what happened? I ran the header tank dry, and the engine just became quiet. Good thing was I was at still reasonable altitude, 4,500 feet, going westbound. So turn on the pump, and then just wait and wait. The propeller was still turning. Wait and wait. And then it fired up and away I went. I will never do that again.
Yeah. I have a timer. Actually, I have two timers, one on my GPS 196 and then one on my Aver tablet, 15-minute fuel timer. I do the same as you. I cycle it. I turn it on and off because otherwise, if I let it get all the way full up, I think it spills fuel actually. I can smell gas. So 15-minute timer is my reminder.
Yes, I think depending on the aircraft attitude, if I leave the pump going continuously, I may actually put some of it over the overflow, and I don't want. That's why I cycle it on and off. Other than that, I think it's a wonderful airplane. My point is, don't try to make the airplane into something it wasn't intended. It's a great little fun, good-looking, sporty airplane that's excellent for one person. It's like a fighter with one person. There's a more heavier, lumbering kind of airplane with two people on board, at least with the Volkswagen engine, with the Revmaster engine in it. I'm sure with the O200, you get a lot better performance and better hauling capability. But it's a highly wing load. It's got a reasonably high wing loading, so don't expect it to float and behave like an autolite. It isn't. It's hot.
Yep, it is. Okay. Any other questions? Anybody? I'm not seeing too much here today. Anything else you want to add, Peter?
No, I think. A little construction detail, if I may say.
Great.
And it has to do, back here, you can, it has to do with the construction of the ailerons. As you are aware, the wing has a significant washout. And people that have faired their root wing in beautifully find that when they attach the aileron, they come to the wing side of the aileron, all of a sudden there's a mismatch. And the reason for this is because instead of matching properly here and properly there, oh, that's a gouge. I don't want to show the gouge, is that they forget they built the aileron flat on the table because it looks flat, but actually the aileron has a bit of a twist to it. And if they don't pay attention to that, then this fairing and this and the wing trailing edge will not match. So I always say, no matter what you do, fair this, make sure that you align this first before you do the root fairing. The other thing has to do with fairing as well, and that has to do with the elevator. This particular GU canard is flying normally, the elevator is deflected about 4 degrees up like that. Now that I didn't know. That's the cruise attitude for it. Had I known that, I would have done the fairing here and the fairing at the root to accommodate that. You can show the fairing at the root as well. See how the fairing mismatches. But this is the normal position of the elevator in cruise. So that could be, that should be paid attention to prior to putting in the root fairing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are useful things that would have been good to know from the plans, which were not disclosed.
That's right. Well, remember, this was in the early days of kit building even, especially composite airplanes. And it was not all refined. The kit was put on the market long time before the whole airplane was finally refined. So it's not blame or it's not bad design. It was just not really finished or completed. Other than that, it still looks like it was fired, a porcelain fired in the oven recently, and it gives me good performance.
What was the date of your first flight again, Peter?
Is it June or July 1982?
No, that's great. And it looks fabulous. It looks, and I'm impressed it's your original paint.
Original paint, original everything. And I challenge some of your viewers to tell me what is the significance of the number 137.
Okay, well, when we put that on YouTube, we'll let them answer it in the questions in the comment section.
What's the significance of the number 137?
Okay.
Well, that's essentially all I have for you. And don't spend hundreds of hours changing the differently. Oh, one thing. I told you before how I was disappointed that the fuselage was different from the original fuselage. One problem, the only real negative aspect of flying this airplane is that when you're sitting in the left seat, you're blind to anything to the rear and to the right of you. You cannot see in that direction. And everybody else that wants to fly alongside of you, they want to fly on your right side. So you are on their left side, nicely looking at you from the distance, while you're prisoner on the left on this airplane, not knowing where they are. And the only escape is to speed up, run around, and come in behind them, because otherwise they hold you prisoner because you don't know if you make a turn, you may cut them off. It would have been more ideal if the fuselage was a little bit more like this, where you could lean over and actually look out over the wing and towards the rear. If I would ever redesign this airplane, I would make sure I have a few more inches up here, an ability to see to the rear. That would be a really great thing to do. But that's the only negative aspect of it, that you're blind to your right and to the rear. I think you may find the same thing. Do you not, Sam?
Yeah, I know that Paul Fisher has a rear view mirror on his instrument panel. That's what he uses to get by.
Yeah, there you go. You need something. Otherwise, it just doesn't feel right. Because the ideal thing is to have a wing at eye level. The other airplanes I make have something like that. You have to make it eye level so you can see forward, you can see over it, you can see under it. It greatly eliminates your blind spots, as we have on a lot of our gliders that, since you're flying in often in a formation with 5 or 6 other gliders in a thermal, you better know where everybody is. So we are very conscious of that kind of visibility. It would be good if that was possible. Also, you can't move your head far enough over sometimes, but it looks sexy, it's good performance, and can't complain.
Okay. All right, Peter. Well, we are just about out of time. I appreciate you guys coming out here in the cold today and showing this all. And terrific airplane, terrific story. And thank you very much.
You're very welcome, and goodbye to you all, and enjoy your airplanes.
There we go. Bye-bye.